Hey everybody, welcome to Ice Cave Radio. I can't believe it's been another week of Star Wars Unlimited already, but here we are. Yet again, your host Doa here along with your other host Charmer, and we've had a week of Star Wars Unlimited between last time we talked and now. Did you get a chance to do locals over the weekend? Did you get a chance to play a bit?
I did not. In fact, I was being chastised by a coworker today about, hey, Chris misses you. Where were you on Sunday? Blah, blah, blah. And so, hey, if you're listening, Chris, I'm sorry. I should be there this week, barring some other weird thing. But I had the pleasure of going to see Childish Gambino in concert the night before.
Very nice.
But I didn't get home until really late, and then we had my mother-in-law as a babysitter, and my wife stayed up and did the Midwest goodbye thing. So I didn't go to bed till like 2:30, 3 a.m. So I just overslept and didn't make it to the local on Sunday.
You got to see Set 2 Lando in person, though. That's exciting.
I did, in fact. I have an excuse. I was seeing Lando perform in Interstellar.
That's Star Wars Unlimited related. We'll take that. I think that works. Yeah. What would be extra cool is if you were able to get him to sign the leader card. I think that'd be pretty sick, actually, to have that.
I might have fainted. I'll be honest.
But it doesn't matter, as long as he just like finishes signing it and slips it back into your pocket or something like that, then you're good. But we'll see. Maybe I just need to get the Werner Herzog signed the client card. That would be incredible. But let's move on. There's a little bit to talk about here. There's a little bit of news. We have some spoilers to talk about today. A couple cards that were revealed earlier. There was a premiere gameplay stream on the Fantasy Flight YouTube channel. They did some competitive play, between their developers anyway. There was a Gar Saxon Mirror versus Gar Saxon Blue. That was fun, and it kind of made me want to play Gar Saxon, so that's kind of dangerous. But hey, right now I'm very much still in the mode of just play whatever looks fun. I took my aggro Boba Fett to my local last week yet again. I did pretty well. I did 2-1 with it, actually. I beat a Boba Cunning and a Ray Red. So it was, I'm beating like legit decks, and these are like decent players too, piloting these decks in my locals. So I'm like, oh no, now I think I'm actually getting pretty good with this, and the list is getting kind of refined. So I wanted to be off of Boba Fett by now, but that just when I thought I was out, aggro Boba keeps pulling me back in. But it's a fun list. What can I say? It's a ton of fun. But
just when you thought you'd sent Boba to the Sarlacc pit, he came crawling back.
He gets a second chance. What can I say? Yeah. Although that's not in my deck because I'm not running Vigilance. Certainly not double Vigilance. We need it. We don't have a Vigilance Boba yet. Maybe we'll get there. Yeah. But let's talk about our cave poll. We have a cave poll of the week to discuss as usual. Let's go to the other screen so we can behold it. And so this time around, which non-lightsaber melee weapon is the coolest in the Star Wars universe? The choices were the Z6 Riot Control Baton, for those of you who are listening on the podcast. That's the one where like the stormtrooper in episode 7 pulls it out and he's like, traitor, when he fights Finn. It's like the zappy thing. You've got the Tusken Gaddafi stick, Gaddafi Gaffy stick. Lots of people call it that, but the technical term, the full name is Gaddafi stick. Anyway,
it's the Gator Phi.
The Gator Phi stick. Either way, it's a thing Tusken Raiders swing around. You've got the Beskar spear, which is kind of a one-of-a-kind melee weapon. Spear made of Beskar, doesn't really need much more description than that, I guess. Vibro blades, which are blades that vibrate, doesn't really need much more description. Cuso Peters, which sounds like the name of a Star Wars character, but is actually, apparently, I didn't know this, the like kind of a double-bladed knife thing. But it's like think of iron knuckles, brass knuckles with like a little blade that sticks out both sides.
Yeah, and then there's like a charge that runs through them too.
Yeah.
If you're wondering, it's the weapon that Dryden Voss has.
It doesn't seem very convenient, but he likes it, so more power to him. Electro staff, it's a staff with electricity, pretty self-explanatory there. Wookiee Reich blade, which is, I didn't know Wookiees had blades. I thought they always just used clubs and things, or just use their arms. I mean, a Wookiee's arms are deadly weapons. Do they even need blades?
They are cultural, and they have a couple of different shapes. I actually went down a deep dive on a bunch of these weapons when I was prepping for this because I was
That is interesting.
you know, I always see all of these, but I only know how some of them look.
Yeah.
Right. I wanted to kind of do the deep dive, and it was fun. I learned a lot, actually.
That does sound like an interesting topic to research, is melee weapons in Star Wars. Our last two on the list are the Gamorrean axe, which is basically just an axe held by a Gamorrean. There's nothing really special about it. And then you've got throwing knives, the least special weapon of all, which are just knives that you throw, which, spoiler alert, got 0 votes, which kind of is right in line with the show it came from, The Acolyte, which has now been canceled as well. So big drama in the Star Wars world here right now. The question is, Charmer, are they going to do the show extra dirty and just erase it off Disney Plus like the Willow show? Remember there was a Willow live action show, which I didn't think it was good. I didn't think it was terrible. I didn't think it deserved to be deleted from history. I wonder if they're going to do that with Acolyte, though.
I really hope that they don't, personally, because while Acolyte has some things that are, you know, potentially not the best, I think
very diplomatic of you.
I think that it actually introduced a couple of things that were actually pretty cool. And that my hot take, I'm not saying that it is a top tier experience by any stretch,
okay.
But I'm old enough to remember that when I left the theater for The Phantom Menace, and for like months after The Phantom Menace, everyone talked about how it was like not Star Wars. It was awful. It was like Star Wars has lost its way. George Lucas should have never made it. Like, it was doom and gloom. People were really, really down on The Phantom Menace. And now we all kind of look back and we're like, yeah, it's campy, but, you know, we got Duel of the Fates and Darth Maul and all of these other cool things. And so I think my hot take is that I think with time, we will look back at The Acolyte and say, you know what, there's a lot wrong with this, but there's some pretty cool moments too. And I would hate to have it erased from Star Wars history, because I personally really enjoyed the fight sequences in Episode 5.
Yeah, I mean, I think the fight choreography was
the Duel of the Fates of that show, where it's like,
sure,
that part should stand alone on its own, and I would hate for that to just be, you know, erased for tax benefits.
Yeah, I don't think any show like that should be deleted off a platform, regardless of how bad it is. And I'm very much in the camp that was not a good show, mostly because of the writing. I think the plot was all over the place. The dialogue was all over the place. I do think the show had great fight choreography. I think that was the one thing that really stood out to me. And there were neat elements to it. The cortosis, things like that added to it, you know? So I didn't hate absolutely everything about it, but I definitely think it's the worst Star Wars thing that's been released yet in Star Wars. But yeah, that's my take on it. I've got another show where I go much more in depth into that. But that said, I don't think it deserves to be deleted from history. I'm still bothered that they removed that Willow show, because again, like, I don't think it was very good, but man, just to like delete that, like, even if it turns out poorly, a lot of people put a lot of work into that, you know, so to just have it not available anywhere it's just sad, you know? So I don't know. That's what I'm wondering now, because that Willow show got disappeared, and that was better than The Acolyte. So I don't know what's going to happen to The Acolyte now. We'll have to wait and see. But anyway, back to the topic at hand. It was impossible not to talk about that, though. That is big Star Wars news. Card game or not. And one of the developers did today, I believe it was MJ Cuts today, I might be wrong, talked about wanting to eventually design cards around characters from The Acolyte, which I think would be pretty cool, you know? So we'll see what happens.
I think so as well.
Hope I'm not misquoting there.
Right now, I know that you cover your stuff on another show. I'll go on record right now. I would rather watch the entire Acolyte, every episode start to finish, than watch episode 9 again.
Oh.
When you said it's the worst thing that Star Wars has put out in like recent whatever, I was like, yeah, but somehow Palpatine returned.
It is. The thing is, though, as much as I am not a big fan of episode 9, I do think it was more competently written than The Acolyte. And for me, it's all about that. I absolutely. Okay, we need a third podcast. We need a third. we need a third podcast now at this point, because this is a whole other conversation. Maybe we need to start at like a Star Wars culture podcast or something beyond this. You know, I'm down. Books, comics. There's a lot of stuff to talk about there. Either way, let's get back to the melee weapons. The number one vote. Actually, we have a three-way tie. 11 votes apiece for the Z6 Riot Control Baton, Tuscan, Gaffy Stick, and the Beskar Spear. Now, what did you choose? I'm curious.
I chose the Petars, the Kyuzo Petars, and my reasoning was actually really simple. In a world where lightsabers, dark sabers, light whips, speaking of the Acolyte, exist, the only thing that, in my opinion, like matters about your non-light oriented weapons is how cool they are. That's actually why I worded this. Like, what's the coolest one? Sure. And I thought that those were the coolest. Like, they're flashy. They're not. I don't think they're meant to be super effective, but that's kind of the point. Like, you know, whenever you see like in films, right? Like there's a gang of ruffians or something, and there's always a couple people with like the practical weapons. There's like a dude with a bat, a dude with an axe. And then you look in the corner and there's like the guy who has like a spiked ball on a chain, and you're like, come on, dude, like you're just waving that around to be cool. That's what the Petars are, right? Like they're the one guy in the gang who's just trying to show off, but I'm okay with that.
That's a weapon that works if you have the sort of intimidation factors. You can get up close to somebody and like cut him up like a crime boss would, right? He's not planning on going into the gladiatorial arena with this thing. He's planning on sidling up and being like, you've been a great friend, and then slitting your throat, right? So yeah, they have a certain purpose, and so I think they work for that. I picked the Tuscan Gaffy Stick, and here's why. Because I think out of non-lightsaber weapons, this is the most iconic melee weapon in Star Wars, because I think it's the best science fiction weapon in Star Wars, where science fiction fantasy, I'll say, because it is the weapon that looks the most like it's from a place that is not Earth, right? Everything else has a very Earth kind of vibe to it, right? You know, whether it's a baton or a spear or a throwing knife or a sword or an axe. This is something that truly looks alien and otherworldly. And it looks like something that has a cultural history to it too. You know, why is the mace end shaped the way it is? Why does the other end have sort of this, you know, cone spike kind of thing, right? Weapons like this obviously have a history to them. And that's what I love about the Gaffy Stick, is that it is a weapon that invokes a cultural history, which I think is something you really want in your unique science fiction fantasy universe. So I think out of all these weapons, this is the one that succeeds the most from a sci-fi fantasy perspective. So that's why I picked it. I think it's a really cool weapon.
Yeah, I can buy that. It is definitely what I would describe as like a world building weapon.
Totally.
And I think you hit all the notes on why that is the case. Like sometimes you put something into your story and it doesn't matter what it's for. You just get people thinking like, I wonder what that's for. I wonder whatever. And so I think those are great. They help sell the kind of like alien feel. And that was the intention.
I like something where it's like, I would pick this thing up and I wouldn't know how to use it, but I know other people are masters with it. So like, how do you manipulate this object in combat, you know, and not knowing that as soon as you look at it is kind of a neat, intriguing thing for sci-fi. So with the other votes, we had 8 for Vibroblade, 6 without you for the Kyuzo Petars. Electro Staff is in there. Great card. Awesome card. Not as popular weapon, though. Only 5 votes. 2 votes for the Wookiee Reich Blade, I would imagine, because most people haven't heard of it, and it's just a knife. You call that a knife? And then Gamorrean Accent, again, throwing knives. No votes. No votes at all. Sorry. Those are apparently the boring weapons. But that was an interesting poll. Well done. I like that one. You come up with great polls.
I try.
Yeah. All right. Well, let's move on to our spoilers. You want to talk about spoilers? We got 2 cards to take a look at.
I do, because they are really exciting, and one of them is a character that I, again, talking about Phantom Menace, always liked, because I felt that she was the Boba Fett of that film, where she doesn't really do a whole lot on screen, but she just looks cool.
She does nothing. She just stands there.
Yeah. She just stands there, like Boba Fett's introduction, realistically, but looks cool. And anytime you have a cool looking bounty hunter in the background, it usually means good things. And then also, I'll be honest, There was a time when I played a decent amount of Young Jedi, which is not a great mechanical card game, but any time I think of Young Jedi, I think of Aura Singh. That's who I'm, of course, talking about for the spoilers. And
I haven't played it. There she is. There's a card. Why don't you go ahead and break this one down for us?
Yeah. So Aura Singh is a 7-cost ground unit, just aggression as far as the aspects go. A 7/6 body with the Underworld and Bounty Hunter tags. Has Overwhelm, and also when an enemy ground unit attacks your base, ready this unit. And this is an uncommon.
Yeah.
This card to me feels very strong as an uncommon, and especially when you factor in that it is a single aspect. So when we start talking about limited, I think it's going to be a pretty big deal. I also will go on record right now. We've seen very little of set 3, but given that we know it's going to have at least some sort of emphasis on tokens, I think cards that have Overwhelm are going to come at a premium in that set, because running over a 1/1 to get rid of it, but also dealing 6 damage to a base is a pretty big deal.
Yeah.
In terms of comparisons, this reminds me of Kraken Gore, but I would argue potentially better. Like, yes, if they attack your base, you're not giving your stuff shield tokens to make better value trades, but you're going to get to ready this. And if they're attacking your base, then you can keep running over whatever units they haven't attacked with yet, right? So if they have 3 units or 4 units, we'll say, because they're playing a bunch of tokens, right? They attack your base with 1, you ready your aura, and you attack one of the ones that hasn't attacked yet, and you get splash damage. They attack your base, you ready her, you attack the other one and get splash damage. It allows you to really play catch up. So in a limited sense, and maybe even further, I think that this card has a lot of application.
Yeah, I mean, I would just go right to face with it each time, because like, are they going to be able to keep up attack for attack when you're doing 7 to their base? Like this feels like a closer for aggressive decks, where it's like you play it and they basically have to attack into it. It has like quasi sentinel kind of, and if they don't, you're going to attack into their base. You just take the initiative, attack into their base. Next turn, you could potentially do 14 damage. Nobody is going to allow you to do that with this card. They have to attack into it, or they have to have some sort of removal. That's the other big problem, is that, you can get yourself into some removal issues with this card, because while I said it does kind of have quasi sentinel, at the same time, it's not a card that does something the moment it comes into play. You kind of have to be a little bit worried about the removal possibility. You have to think about what other 7 drops this one is going to go up against in terms of making it into your deck. I do agree it's going to be a bomb in limited in a good way. But constructed, I think it'll find a way into a couple decks here. But I just wonder what the competition is going to be for this card. Either way, I really like the mechanic on it. And I'm looking forward to, again, throwing it down late game if my aggro deck or like a tempo deck goes a little bit late, and see how they handle it.
One of the other things that I will consider anyway, and this is probably just fresh on my mind because I've been playing a decent amount of Jabba lately. Admiral Pyatt has been slowly going up on my playability list. I started splashing like 2 copies into my Jabba decks, because it turns out if you play him and they don't answer Pyatt, playing Crate Dragon with Ambush is pretty good.
Yeah, that doesn't sound bad.
Becomes like a cheaper version of Crate Dragon, though, in that if you can give her Ambush, and also if you're playing Pyatt, you can also play some of the other command cards that enable Ambush. But if you can play her with Ambush, run over a unit, get the Overwhelm, and then also if they don't attack into her and they attack your base, rinse and repeat, that's also incredibly strong. And the fact that she's also Underworld and Bounty Hunter means she's going to play into some of those natural synergies that already exist in my Jabba list. So that is one place where I might consider adding her when we get to set 3.
Yeah, it's an intriguing card, and we'll have to see how it kind of shapes up when we get to see the rest of the reviews, the rest of the spoilers coming out. Sorry, you'll have to edit this part out. I'm waiting for my kid to stop crying. What's up? All right. Hi. Just having a bad day, apparently. All right. Should be good. All right, let's sorry to make you edit more. But let's move on. All right. Next on the list for spoilers is going to be a 6-cost Command Villainy Consolidation of Power. It's a plan. Is it a good plan? We'll find out. Choose any number of friendly units. You may play a unit from your hand if its cost is less than or equal to the combined power of the chosen units for free, then defeat the chosen units. So this card has all sorts of interesting possibilities. Because it's very power-based, you have to think both about how can I build a board that has a high amount of power and lives to my 6 resource turn so I could play this and then play something else from my hand. It requires a lot of setup, but I have a feeling it's going to find use in that there's going to be a lot of opportunity to, play a few cards out that are durable and then, get this out there, right? So obviously you're like, oh, well, if I have 9 power out, I can play a Crate Dragon, right? Or if I've got 10 power out, I can play a Devastator. There's all the big things you can think about with that. But it might be good too just to sneak something out that's just a little bit more expensive, like an Emperor Palpatine or a Vader a little bit early, So this card just has a lot of interesting things to think about with it.
Being that this card is in command, which is very often associated with either increasing your amount of available resources or playing things for cheaper, it makes sense that a lot of people are going to think about the things that you just said, right? Like, how do I play a Crate Dragon early? And that is definitely on the menu. But when I see this, there are 2 other things that kind of come to mind for me. The first is, I could see it, whether it's this set or even in the future, a situation where we start to get decks that are focused on reanimation, because we've already seen that in command as well, right? With the Emperor's Return, Palpatine's Return. But also, I could see it being perhaps an aspect that becomes kind of home to Premier when defeated effects. And then this card becomes an enabler for some of those. Like, I could see situations where you have units that have like a really strong when defeated and your opponent just dances around it because they don't want it to die, but this gives you an easy way to do it while also enabling other things. So that's one of the ways that I thought about it. It's almost like it gives you exploit for units that don't have exploit, and that's going to be pretty relevant when we get to set 3, I think. But the other thing that I was thinking about, if I'm being entirely honest, is just extending the value of units if you are a little bit more trade centric. So if you think about like a mid-range deck where you play cards that have good stats or good value, and they start trading into your opponent's units, right? And then before you use them all the way up, maybe you get 1 attack in on base on a couple of them, and then you play this while they're already exhausted to just play something of greater value. So again, I'm probably just got Jabba on the brain as of late, but in Jabba lists, it's not uncommon to be playing things like the Reputable Hunter on turn 1. If you don't have the initiative, they play a unit, you give a bounty, you get a 3/4, right? So if that trades with something and now it's down to a 3/2 or a 3/1, getting a little bit of extra mileage out of like that and whatever your 3 or 4 drop was to then also play something, 7 or 8 power seems really good. And I think 8, if I'm being entirely honest, is going to be the real sweet spot. Because I think getting to 8 power will be relatively easy across 2 units when we're at that 6 resource spot. And there's a lot of really powerful 8 drops. Obviously, 9 drops and whatever are still going to be great. We still have Crate Dragon. We still have like Relentless and all of these other things. But I think there's a lot of really strong like 7 and 8 drops that if you can recycle some of your units into, you're going to see a lot of value. In fact, I could even see it become almost like a mid-range finisher where you might attack base with a couple of units and then consolidate their power into a Maul who then runs over a unit with Ambush and Overwhelm to finish somebody off.
Yeah, it's quite possible. I mean, there's a lot, like I said, there's a ton of possibilities with this one. I mean, I think about Traitorous costing 5 and then this costing 6. So you steal something for 5 and then 6, you can add it to what you already got on the board to, pay for something bigger, right? So you can make their units pay for it. The when defeateds are very relevant too, because if you look at the ordering of the card too, it says you play it, first, then defeat the chosen unit. So that means the unit that you play if the defeated units, give XP or something like that. The unit you play can benefit from that, right? So the order of operations on the card itself kind of lends itself well to exploiting the when defeated stuff too. So yeah, just a really, really cool card. I'm very interested to see how people end up using it. Like I said, everyone's thinking about the big stuff. I mean, it's natural to think about what are the giant things you can play, but I like the idea of stealing somebody else's unit, attacking with it, and then sacrificing it to play something bigger from my hand with this. That sounds great. But either way, really, really cool card. A couple neat spoilers, and I believe it was Xander on the stream today said that spoiler season started on September 1st. Again, I was babysitting while I was listening to the stream, so I'm pretty sure I got that right, but if not, please correct me. I think that's what he said. So we're coming up on spoiler season fast for this one, so curious to see what everybody gets, what comes out of this, what sort of a prequel fun we get to have with this set. Will there be a Jar Jar Binks leader? Will there be a Jar Jar Binks unit? I don't know. There's got to be, right? If it's prequel stuff, at least the unit. I don't know about leader, but at least the unit.
There's got to be a unit.
Yeah, you can't do a prequel set and not include Jar Jar. Come on. I mean, pod racers are in the prequels. Just going to throw that out there. Although, like I said, I'm still holding out for my pod racer set. But that's a whole different podcast yet again. The pod racer cast, that is. But that's our spoilers. Let's... the
podcast.
The podcast. Oh, man. Great idea I've had just now. But anyway, well, let's talk about our main topic here. We have a Discord. If you're not in the Ice Cave Radio Discord already, you absolutely should be. We're nearing 500 people in the Discord. There's all sorts of great discussion happening there all day, every day, basically. We just announced a King of the Hill show as well, a King of the Hill style show where we're going to pit one person from the Discord against another person in the Discord each week. Charmer and I are going to cast that match, and then the winner will stay to play a challenger. It's called Conquer the Cave. So there's a lot of stuff going on in the Ice Cave Radio Discord right now. That is kind of like the place you want to be if you listen to the podcast and you want to get involved with all the fun stuff we're doing besides just talking about the game. And so one of the things I noticed recently was that there's a good amount of conversation about how to improve at the game. There's some players that feel like they got to a certain point and they feel stuck, or they feel like every game just feels like bad draws and their opponent drew perfectly. Honestly, a lot of the typical stuff you hear people talk about when they're trying to improve at TCGs, at trading card games, right? So I thought that would be a good topic today, is talk about what are some of the common plateaus people hit when they're improving and what are some of the best ways to sort of overcome that. So I wanted to start the conversation, Charmer, with the thing I mentioned the most recently when I was kind of doing that little breakdown, which is the feeling that your opponent just always draws well and that you, for whatever reason, are just always drawing poorly. Oh, if only I got better draws, I could have won. I hear that all the time from newer players a lot of times. And when I hear that over my many years of card game playing, I've come to realize, because I felt that too, but what I've come to realize is that it usually boils down to one of two problems. The first is that your deck construction needs work. Your cost curve is off, and so you find yourself not drawing what you need very often. That is a bad draw, quote unquote, but it's not a luck-based bad draw. It's a deck construction issue. So that's something to look at. The other thing that I notice is that a lot of times you'll feel like you're just getting bad draws, but it will really be because you used your early resources in the game poorly. And in this, I don't mean resources as in SWU resources. I mean like resources as in your cards in general. Did you play the right thing at the right time? Did you attack? Did you do your order of operations correctly for your turn? Did you resource the right card? It's usually one of those two things, either deck construction or gameplay, where there's a deficiency in there and that's causing you to feel that way. Do you agree? Would you add anything to that? And then how would you address that?
I mostly agree. There is definitely at least one thing that I would add to it, and I'll get to that in a moment. But for me right now, on the two that you mentioned, I will say that one, deck construction is very often a big part of it. And if you are struggling in this game, if you're coming from other games where you have like dedicated resource cards, a lot of times if you're coming from a Magic, for example, or a Pokemon where you have to have energy or whatever, it might just be that your resource ratios are wrong. But in this game, everything is a resource. So Usually, it could either be, as Doa said, something related to your costs, where maybe you have too many high cost cards or not enough early plays. But it also could be that your unit to non-unit ratios are off. So what I mean by that is, let's say you're playing an aggressive deck, but you're also running a bunch of stuff like Surprise Strike. And you're losing games because you're drawing like all your events or whatever, and you don't have anything to play it on. Well, look at how many units you have, and the answer might be I have to put more units in, right? Cards like Surprise Strike do nothing if you don't have a body to use it on. So you'll want to look at everything, number of upgrades, number of units. Also, a big one, in my opinion, is number of space units. Especially in the set 1 meta, I used to hear a lot like, well, they got out in space and I just never drew mine. And it's like, well, yeah, it was the Sabine deck that's running like 15 space units and you have, 3 fire sprays and that's it. Like, of course, that's a problem. So
yeah,
I would check that. The next thing is you might be thinking to yourself, okay, well, this is a meta deck. And in fact, I copied this list and it won some big event. So I don't think it's deck construction, and that very well could be. And so the next thing to look at is piloting, right? Are you resourcing the right cards early is a big one. I find sometimes I see players who they draw their really cool, like powerful play early. And so instead of resourcing it, they just have it in their hand until they hit 7 resources. Like, I know it doesn't feel great, but sometimes just resourcing your Darth Vader is the right move.
Yep.
Similarly, in other matchups, some people just by reflex say whatever the most expensive thing is, if I can't play it, that's the resource. But there are some exceptions to that where if you know that a certain card vastly improves your chances of winning a certain matchup, keeping it could be correct, right?
Yeah.
So again, a good example would be if I have an overwhelming barrage in my opening hand and I'm playing against an aggressive list, I'm going to hold on to it. That's a really important play when you get to 5 resources. So a lot of it is matchup specific and it's going to take reps, but you have to like actively think about what is important and why at this moment. But the last thing, so the thing that I was alluding to that I would add, and this is, I think, a big one with newer players because they don't think about the importance, is learning when to mulligan. Because sometimes you might even have things that you can play on the first 2 turns, but if you know the matchup and they're not the right things or they're not good things, again, I'll use that Sabine example from set 1. You might have a 2-drop and a 3-drop, but if your 2-drops don't trade into their good 2-drops, or you don't have an early space unit or whatever it is that you need. So like for me, a lot of times when I was not playing Sabine in set 1, if I was on anything command, I was hunting for Consortium Star Viper because I knew on turn 2, I wanted to be able to use my ECL with initiative on their A-wing, get a value trade, and restore 2. That's a really important thing. And if I didn't have it, I would mulligan. Now, it feels weird to mulligan often, but it's one of those things where in this game, because anything can be a resource, it's not as apparent all the time that you should be mulliganing. So if you find yourself losing, and even if you're not like losing till the late game, like if you're losing on, resource 8, 9, 10, and you're thinking to yourself, well, I just drew the wrong cards, just think back to that beginning and say like, A, did I mulligan? And then B, should I have mulliganed? And would that have changed the things that led that early game into that bad position? So that is a big one I find, is that I see not enough newer players mulliganing when they should be.
Yeah, I think that's a great thing to add on there, is when to mulligan. Because this game is so free with the way it lets you do it too. You can just simply get a full hand again. You don't have to sacrifice anything. Everything goes right back in there. So yeah, I agree there. That's a great thing to add to it. I'll add too, on the topic of early turns, when I get my opening hand, when I'm thinking about mulliganing or not, I think out my first 3 turns. So that's the 2 resource turn, the 3 resource turn, and the 4 resource turn. And like, honestly, I'm thinking farther than that. I'm thinking all the way up to my flip turn at this point, minimum. But for a newer player, I think it's good to think about, what are my first 3 turns going to look at? What cards in my hand will be the most pressure on my opponent if I play them in this order, right? So that's the first basic thing, is don't even think about your opponent. Think about your own hand, is like, what's the most effective order I can play these cards out? 2, 3, 4 resources, right? just starting from that point, I think will get you winning a couple games, right? You'll get into that habit, and then you'll start to think, okay, well, I know what they're probably going to play. I know what this deck's early game looks like. So that's going to now have an impact in what I think my best 2, 3, 4 plays are going to be, and that's going to change it. And so you've hit that next level. Then you think, okay, I have a good 2, but now I have 2 different options for 3. What do I think they're going to have? How does that relate to, which one of those cards is going to put the most pressure onto them? And then decide, with that, and maybe like keep that in your opening hand and don't resource one of those. Because a lot of times a newer player will be like, well, I don't need 2 3-drops. I'm only playing 1 on my 3 resource turn, But maybe you should be resourcing something else so that you have the option of both of those depending on what they do too. So it starts to get very complex, and you can get there as a player. That sounds like a lot, but if you just take it step by step like that and do, this is what I'm focusing on this local, this week or whatever, then I'm going to add this to it next week, then I'm going to add this to it, then it's going to become like second nature, right? And you're going to be thinking 3 or 4 layers deep, 6 turns deep at the beginning of the game, and that's going to give you like an advantage. And it won't feel as hard as it sounds, because you'll have gotten there incrementally, So I think that's a good thing to think about starting out, is that incremental improvement too. Another thing that I think people, look at a game and they're like, oh, I had no chance, is order of operations. So let's talk about order of operations for a moment, because I think that's another big one. Order of operations includes the resource side of things, which, we kind of already covered, so we can kind of skip that with this. So in an action phase, it is what do I have on board and how am I using that? What do I have in my hand and how am I using that? And so the order in which to do that is a big thing, right? I tend to think, and I want your opinion on this too, of course, for a newer player, I generally suggest you usually want to use what you have on board first before you start playing cards. That's not always the right thing to do, but in a basic general sense of approaching Star Wars Unlimited, I think that's a good place to start, where at the minimum, what you're doing is making it more likely that your opponent will have to spend their resources and play something first, which will then let you make better decisions about what you're playing from your hand, right? Because you've already seen them spend some of their stuff. So then what you spend can come from a more educated place, right? So that involves, I'm going to attack first, or I'm going to trade first, and then I'm going to play my card second. Again, that's not always the case that that's the right move, but I think from a basic starting out standpoint, you usually want to use what's on the board first and then play cards from your hand. What do you think? Would you agree that that's a good basic bare bones place to start from? And then add to there.
If you're talking like absolute bare bones, probably.
Yeah, that's what I'm talking about. I'm talking about a brand new player who's going to their first locals and all that and wondering, how the heck do I even play out an action phase? I think that's a good place to start.
I just immediately think about, so there are 2 things that as you're progressing as a player that will start to change your mind, right? So you can start with that as just like your, casual, like, this is my starting point.
Yeah, start there.
But immediately as you start to expand your decision making, the 2, I think, low-hanging fruit, easy ways where you can start giving yourself an exception to that rule are, the first one is, if you look at your hand, for example, and you don't have any way to respond to what your opponent does anyway, right? If your choice is I attack first and play a unit, or I play a unit and then I attack, ask yourself the question, is there any unit that they might play where I would wish that instead of attacking them, I could attack into the unit after I've played it, right? And if the answer is yes, there's something I'm worried about, then just play your unit first and then see if they play the thing. And then if not attack, that's fine. But that's one of the interesting things about Star Wars, because it's an attacker chooses targets game. Your units, when they are ready, are also by themselves in some form, a form of removal, right? So if you don't have an event in your hand, like a takedown to answer their thing, but you have a unit at the ready, that can be removal. So that first exception I would say is always do the things that are non-conditional first. Now, most of the time that will be just you do your attack first, wait and see what they do, and then play cards from your hand. But there are going to be situations where Instead, you might want to play the unit first, and then maybe you take the trade. The second exception that as you're learning that I would start to look for, and this is also, I just think, good advice in general. There's a very famous article that gets quoted all the time about, card games. It started from Magic the Gathering, and the article was, "Who is the beatdown?" And there's even been updates and iterations of it. But the very brief description of said article and what it's trying to teach is just understanding who is the aggressor, right? So in any given matchup, if I know like my opponent is trying to race me because their deck is meant to be faster, right? Then in those cases, I would say, yes, take the trades first, right? Because a lot of times, if you do that, you're saving yourself damage, right? If you wait to attack, you're letting your opponent attack you. Also, for the same reasons that Doa was mentioning, if you attack first and you have cards in your hand, then when they play something, you can respond, right? So they are the aggressor, and you are, even if you're not playing a control deck, you are the person who is answering, right? Like they're posing a question or they're playing threats, and you have to have the answer. So just always put yourself in a position to answer. Similarly, if you are the aggressor, then you might want to prioritize attacking first because your unit might not be around. And it's very easy for some decks to identify your role, but other decks not so much, right? If you're playing a double vigilance late game like Avenger deck, like you're the control player, right? You want to be reacting. If you're playing Sabine or something else like a Kylo Ren where you're just trying to race your opponent down as fast as possible, you are the aggressor, very cut and dry. But if you're playing like a Bo-Katan list with some Mandalorians, sometimes you might want to, get the damage in and then use your leader to ping whatever they play.
Yeah.
Sometimes you want to play something and leave your units ready to attack whatever they play, et cetera, et cetera. And so that's where it gets a bit harder. And so I would just say, think to yourself, like, am I playing against a deck that is faster than me or slower than me? And then adjust accordingly.
Yeah. And you'll learn that from reps too. And that's why I always recommend using the stuff on your board first, because like you'll figure it out really fast. And nothing feels worse in Star Wars Unlimited than having a unit die while it's ready. So that's a good, I think that's a good rule of thumb for a new player, is never let one of your units die ready. If it's going to die, make sure it's exhausted first, and think about that each turn. If I don't attack with this unit now, is it going to die before I get a chance to attack with it? Well, guess what? The game is about reducing your opponent's base to 0 life. So attacking their base and doing damage to their base is ultimately the most important thing in the game. So never let a unit die ready. It's going to happen from time to time. Obviously you can never prevent it all the time, but just focusing on making sure that every unit is exhausted before it gets taken out, I think is a good thing to do. I think if you follow that stuff, what we just talked about, and then what we talked about a moment ago, that's gonna be a great baseline to start with as far as improving at the game. I wanted to jump into a little bit more complex topics too. This is the kind of thing I wish we had visual aids for and all that. But I mean, a lot of you are just listening anyway, so a visual aid wouldn't help you. But there's something I like to think about, and I'm sure there's like a poker term for it or something. It feels like there's always a poker term for everything we talk about in TCGs. But I like to think about playing your opponent's deck. Like, everything I do should be done with the intent of influencing what my opponent does, So, for instance, let's take an exception to the last thing we talked about. Maybe I have this unit that I could attack with, but I want to do something else with it later in the turn. Maybe there's a card I can play from my hand that they'll be more likely to attack, that they will see as a bigger threat, even though I know the first card is a bigger threat because of what else I have in my hand. So if there's a way I can save that unit by playing something else instead and influencing what they do, great. That's one, little example of playing your opponent's deck, right? Or, I'm trying to think of other things you can do, attacking certain units on their side to, make them play certain stuff. Or here's a great example. I just played a game that I won. That was a very close game in my last local, where I was playing Boba Fett Red. I was playing Shadows of the Galaxy Boba Fett Heroism Command with aggression, and I had a bunch of units out. I had 3 or 4 units out, and I was in a situation where I knew I wasn't going to be able to get in with all the damage I wanted to that turn, but I wanted to maximize the damage I could do, even though I knew something was going to die, you know, but I really wanted to get in there. And my goal was to get to the point where something would live to next turn to finish off the game, right? So I played Attack Pattern Delta, which was admittedly a Charmer suggestion for the deck, which has been a fantastic card in there. Now, what Attack Pattern Delta does, it's a double command aspect card, so I have to pay 2 extra for it, which makes it cost 5 in that deck, but that's totally fine because it says give a unit +3/+3, give one of your units +2/+2, and give one of your units +1/+1. So you have 6/6 worth of stats to distribute across 3 units, which you can then use throughout the turn. So what I did was they had a Slave 1 on, or Fett's Fire Spray, my bad, Boba Fett's formerly named Slave 1 ship over on their side. And and I wanted to make sure that they couldn't attack into my ship and kill it, right? That if they chose to attack me, they would lose that as well, which is something they wouldn't want to do. So I put the 3/3 on my Boba Fett leader to basically make him out of reach for killing on their side, because I knew from their aspects they didn't have like a Rival's Fall. They weren't playing Vigilance. And then I put the +2/+2 on my Marauder on the space side, which, because of the health remaining, made it too big for Fett's Fire Spray to attack into without dying. Because remember, it gets the +1 attack from the Boba Fett as well. This is a complex board situation. And then I put the 1/1 on another unit that put it just out of reach of being able to 1-for-1 trade for everything else. So I didn't just put the biggest numbers on the biggest thing, you know? I distributed the numbers in a way that made it really difficult for them to /impossible for them to attack into my units efficiently. And so because of that, I guaranteed 2 of those units got through and did their damage. I was able to then claim initiative and then do the 5 damage next turn to close the game out, because they couldn't remove all that stuff even after the tokens fell off. So that's kind of what I'm talking about is you know, where me and the way I played that Attack Pattern Delta had a big influence on how they then had to play out their turn, and I could make an accurate prediction of how they would use their stuff on the board based on the position I put them in, you know. And that's kind of a long-winded way of talking what I'm trying to communicate here, which is you want what you do to influence what your opponent does, because then you're essentially playing their deck. And if you're playing their deck, you can make them lose.
Yeah. So you just you pull a Lando, you pull a DJ, and you play both sides.
There you go. But you don't need those cards to do it. You can just use your cards to do it.
No, you can use whatever.
Yeah.
Whatever you can rack up in your brain. I will say, you know, I'm saying that jokingly, but if you're trying to teach yourself and you're a new player and you're like, hey, how do I know what my opponent wants to do? Do what I did in middle school when I was trying to learn chess, and just play against yourself and literally play both sides. And then you'll see both sides and you'll understand, like, okay, you know, if I knew what they were doing and I could anticipate it, how could I disrupt it? And take that knowledge with you to your next, you know, locals or your next series of games, and it might help you do exactly what Doa is talking about.
Yeah, there you go. So it's a slightly more advanced concept, but I think, you know, where we're talking about plateaus, that's the next plateau you get to, right? Is you've kind of mastered the basics where you're thinking a little bit ahead. You're, you know, playing your cards from your hand well. You're, you know, playing you're playing out your stuff on board well. And then you get to the point where, like, you start to lose to the players in the local that everybody knows are the good players, quote unquote, right? You beat, you know, your fellow casuals, but then you keep losing to the top players at the store, right? And so how do you get to the point where you're going to beat them, you know? And then you get to the point where it's like, now you have to learn how to make what you do influence what they do, right? Because then again, you know, then you're at the point where it's, you know, you're playing their deck, right? And they're going to be trying to do the same thing to you too. So you're going to have to watch out for that. You know, they're going to play something that looks a little bit off to you, and you're going to think, well, why did they do that? And then you're going to think, okay, is my most obvious response to what they did the right response? And it's great when you see through that and you do a different thing anyway, and you just see their faces like, oh, but why didn't you do that thing that's so obvious? And it's like, it's
they
great.
Had the soul read.
That's what I love about this game. That's what I love about this game, is that because it's an action system where you go back and forth like that, you get so many mind games that occur when you've got good players playing against each other. It's so much fun. Like, yeah, you just get to this point where it's like, when you have players like that, it's just a joy to play, win or lose, because there's a, you're both trying to like get each other to do the wrong thing. And when one of you finally catches the other, it's like, oh, you finally got me, but it's a lot of fun either way. Like those games I played last week, like those are some of the most fun matches I played, because they were all, the ones I won were very, very close against good players. And, we both just had a great time playing it out. So yeah, it's fun to get to that point. And it seems intimidating, right? It's easy for us to say. We've been playing card games for decades. A lot of people out there that are playing Star Wars Unlimited, this might be their first card game, And the good news is that it doesn't take you decades to catch up. You can get there in a month or two if you really, push yourself, right? Obviously, there's going to be experience things that'll come with only time. But at the same time, you can become a good Star Wars Unlimited player in a month if you really buckle down and look at it. I guarantee you.
Maybe even less. Yeah. Listen, I am not a smart man. So if I can do it, you can do it.
Same here.
That's your motivational speech.
Yeah, that's right. I have a bachelor's in art. So if I can succeed in a game with a lot of basic math, anyone can. Bye. Yep. Hi. So there you go. Any new things to add? Any more to add to that?
Yeah. So the only other thing that I would consider adding, for that second level, right? So you were talking about like you hit your first or maybe even your second plateau, and then you're wondering like, how can I grow? Especially if you're just still playing at your locals, or maybe you're thinking about trying to go to your first like big tournament. The last bit is something that happens before you even sit at the table, and that's your deck building, right? So understanding that you should expect to see certain decks. And so when we're talking about that idea of like thinking about, what would my opponent play against me? Knowing that for the meta decks can be very important, because you should expect to see them. But also just kind of keeping in mind generic strategies, because occasionally you'll go to an event and somebody breaks out something new that you haven't seen before. And you're like, I don't even know what I'm supposed to do. Yeah. So you just say, okay, well, if they're not coming out blazing fast, then, maybe it's a slower deck. And if that's the case, what are the things in those aspects I should be worried about? Are they playing a bunch of capture cards? Should I be worried about Dryden Voss? Are they, trying to ramp up to play something big? There's a lot of pretty generic strategies that even if somebody comes at you with like a leader that you've never played against, you can still kind of sniff out based on some of the cards they're including in their deck.
A big part of that too, I think, is just strictly card memorization. And that's another thing I think that seems intimidating for newer players, where it's like, well, you've got hundreds of cards to learn. And it does just require a little bit of kind of rote memorization. But I would suggest two things in that category, where, one is never be afraid to ask your opponent if you can read the card. Just reading the cards at locals is a great way to learn them over time, because you're experiencing what that card does and you're reading it at the same time. So that's going to really implant that in your memory. Another thing that I do, and this is something I've taken from my years and years of esports commentary, is that there's a lot of memorization involved with those games too. When I was learning to cast League of Legends, I had about a month. I had 2 months to prepare for my first League of Legends cast, and there were already near 100 champions in the game, and they all had 4 abilities. And so, and any champion could be picked in any game. So what I did, and what you can do too, is you just have it on your phone in some way, whether you go to, SWDB or the Unlimited website or something, have a place where you can look at the cards. And then when you're standing in line for something, or you're, waiting for 5 minutes, 10 minutes here and there, we all have those times in our day where we're just waiting for whatever reason, and it's a 5-minute chunk. And so that's 5 minutes. You can just scroll through an aspect and just read the cards, and you'll be surprised how effective that is at learning a lot of things very quickly. I would just ride the subway in Korea when I lived over there with League of Legends, and just like, I would look at a champion and then I would close my eyes and say the abilities back to me, back to myself, which is probably weird for people on the subway seeing this like this foreigner with his eyes closed whispering rocket punch to himself, you know. But it works in Star Wars Unlimited as well, right? Where instead of spending 5 minutes going through social media, spend 5 minutes memorizing cards, and that's going to make you that much better at your next local, right? Be productive with that time. And I think using that time is so huge in terms of improving at games like this.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then once you get it figured out, then you got to memorize the item builds.
Yeah, man. That was, I'll tell you, that was a lot of work, but we got it done. Had some good years with League. But with Star Wars Unlimited, yeah, just memorize the cards, you know, or just go look at deck lists. You know, it's that 5-10 minutes here and there throughout your day, that's like very valuable time that you don't want to waste just looking at the news or looking at social media, you know. Put it to use for a goal you have, right? So maybe that's life advice more than Star Wars Unlimited advice. But I started doing that like, I don't know, 10 years ago now, where I'm just like, I'm going to use this time to learn something instead of just scroll, you know? And I've read like multiple novels this way and all that. It's like, it's so good. But anyway, a good way to memorize cards, which I think is going to help kind of break through that plateau too, you know, because like Charmer said, when you see a deck that you're not totally sure of, you can imagine that aspect list then of cards and then think about what cards could be available. Yeah, you'll do that easier. So, or
you can just pretend that the list doesn't care and play an aggro deck because math is for blockers.
Hey, that's my way of doing things. I love the aggro. I've always loved the aggro, and I always will love the aggro. Hence my aggro Boba Fett I'm trying to make work for months now. And it does work, just not as well as some of the other decks. That's all. That's okay. Yeah, so there you go. Hopefully those have been a couple helpful tips for improving at Star Wars Unlimited. We're going to do more of this stuff in the future here. I feel like this could be kind of some side video content too, but it's been talked about a lot on the Discord lately, so I wanted to make it a topic. Once again, join our Discord. It's awesome. And Charmer, we've reached a very exciting point in the show right now because you and I have decided, we've talked about this before, but we decided we were going to have a showdown between the two of us, a best of 3 to not necessarily decide anything, but just kind of have some fun, challenge ourselves on the deck building side, and produce some kind of fun content. So what we are going to do, we're going to play best of 3 against each other in the future, and we're going to record that and do our own commentary over it later on. But before we do that, we have to decide what decks we're going to build. And so I have prepared a fun spinning wheel that will pick both our leader and our aspect at random. And then that will be the deck that we have to build for this best of 3 that we will play over the next week or two and then release to you. And we'll talk about our lists at some future show. So the question is, Charmer, are you prepared? Do you want to go first, or do you want me to go first? What do you think?
I want to go first.
Okay, so here is the wheel of leaders. This has all leaders in Star Wars Unlimited on it from every set. You can see there's a lot of segments on this wheel, but there's a lot of leaders to pick. So I'm going to hit the spin button, and it's going to randomly select one of the leaders. Are you prepared to see what leader you will play in this best of 3?
Yeah.
All right, we're going to spin it.
I mean, I'm going to use the Force because I want the boy, so I'm going to get Iden.
Oh, are you? Or are you going to get... Oh, all right.
Oh, okay.
Interesting. Right. Yeah, okay.
I was kind of hoping for Fennec there so I could show off the showcase, but...
Yeah. Well, what do you think about... what do you think about this leader? What do you think about Bo-Katan?
I'm excited because I think that she is something that I've wanted to try to tackle in Constructed anyway, and I think there's a couple of aspects that have a lot of promise. So I'm basically right now just crossing my fingers saying not cunning. I think any of the other 3 has legs. Mm-hmm. Cunning is I think the biggest stretch. Not impossible, but
we have to pick the aspect too. So we've got another spinning wheel for the aspects. You ready? Oh
yeah, let's do this. Let's see how bad
What's
it is.
It's gonna be Bo-Katan with the aspect. Oh, it's cunning.
All right, it's gonna be Bo-Katan cunning. It is all right.
Yeah, that's gonna be interesting. Not a lot of Mandalorians in cunning, but you know, I believe in you. I believe you can make it work. There's a neutral Mandalorian out there. Don't worry.
Yeah,
Don't worry.
there is a neutral.
I shouldn't laugh so hard because we haven't picked mine yet, so I should.
In
Yeah, I
in
shouldn't
the
gloat
comment
yet.
section for this, I want you all to post what the over under is that you have on number of off aspect Mandalorians I put in this.
I mean, hey, you can still put the Darksaber in. That's the important thing, you know?
Yeah.
Yeah. All right. Well, I guess it's my turn now. I can't get too gleeful because we don't know who's going to be yet. All right. I'm afraid. Let's roll. What leader am I going to play?
You're gonna get something cool like Command Dr. Afra or something.
Oh my gosh. I just got Ray. Okay. I get Ray? Sure. But again, this is very aspect dependent.
I don't think so.
We'll see you don't think so? What
No,
if
I
it's
think
Ray
there's-
Cunning? That's still pretty good.
I think Ray Cunning is fantastic, personally.
Oh, well, let's find out what it's going to be.
I actually think that the worst option is
If it's
probably aggression.
If it's meta, do I reroll? Oh, Ray Command.
Man,
All
I
right.
have your list already built.
Hey, you want to share your list? No, I have to build
play
it.
against it. That
I have to
list
build
is
it
rough.
myself. Okay, so Ray Command is my list, and then Bo-Katan Cunning is your list. Now, we see a lot of Ray aggressions, and we see a lot of Ray vigilance, a lot of Ray Blue and a lot of Ray Red. I don't think I've ever seen a Ray Command at my local or anything like that. So,
Oh man, it is.
I'm sure it's good. I mean, clearly, it's
It's my favorite Ray that's not double vigilance, if I'm being honest.
All right.
I will be happy to share with you all of the things that I think are very good with it after our contest.
Not now, not yet. You gotta wait.
Not now.
Yep. Okay. So we gotta build
I wanna
those
see
decks.
how close your list ends up to mine before I say anything.
I mean, you know me though. It's probably gonna be you know me. It's more on the aggressive side already. I guarantee you. But we'll see. We'll see what happens here. I have not yet built a Ray list, so this is gonna be exciting. So it's going to be Bo-Katan Cunning versus Ray Command. And we're going to play that match in the next week or so, and then record that, of course, and put it out in a separate video. And then we'll jump on the podcast in the future and talk about our lists and how things went. So something to get excited for the future. But yeah, that's it. Then for this episode. Before we close, though, I will suggest everyone goes to icecaveradio.com. You can find our merch store there. We've got some very cool t-shirts, if I do say so myself. We've got a link to the Discord, which again, you must be in the Discord. And then you've got a link to, our YouTube, all our podcast platforms, all that kind of stuff to find all the content for us there. Any final thoughts before we close it out, Charmer? You're already building your list, aren't you?
I mean, I was trying to see how many Mandalorians I have to work with before I figure out how bad this is.
Yeah, I'm gonna jump. I can't wait to jump in and start building my list too. I love deck building in this game, and it's gonna be a ton of fun. So, all right. Well, and maybe we'll expand this idea to the Discord later too. But for now, something to get excited about. That's it for this episode of Ice Cave Radio. Everybody, thanks again for listening. Charmer has one last thing to say before we go.
May the Force be with you.